The U.S. Democratic Party clinches a key victory in a Senate runoff election, an important win for the Biden administration. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Senator Raphael Warnock has won re-election in the southern state of Georgia. Warnock narrowly defeated his Republican opponent, Herschel Walker, in a highly anticipated race. Democrats will now have a narrow majority in the U.S. Senate, 51 to 49. We begin with this report from CGTN's Nathan King.
It is my honor to utter the four most powerful words ever spoken in a democracy. The people have spoken.
It was a party atmosphere in Atlanta a month after the midterm elections. Democrat Raphael Warnock won his runoff against Republican Party candidate Herschel Walker, handing his party a 51-49 seat slim majority in the U.S. Senate. While the Republicans will have a slim majority in the House of Representatives come January, a Democrat majority in the Senate means the U.S. President Joe Biden can make appointments, seat judges, and block legislation from the lower house much more easily. For the Democrats, control of the Senate means their party has bucked the historical trend of midterm elections, which usually sees reverses for the party that controls the White House. For the Republicans, it's a repudiation of the leadership of former President Donald Trump, who backed Herschel Walker and several other unsuccessful candidates for office over concerns of other party leaders.
I'm just happy that Warnock won. I'm happy that everybody came back off for the runoff, so that was great.
Why do you like Warnock? Why do you like Warnock?
I just think he's a better candidate for Georgia. He is more experienced, and I think he's far more prepared to actually sit in that position than the other candidate was.
The implications for Trump's 2024 campaign for president could be profound. Some Republicans are suggesting he should not be their party's candidate for the White House. Meanwhile, Democrats are buoyed by a strong voter turnout in Georgia's Senate race and gains across the country at the local level, putting them in a much stronger position than anticipated going into the next election cycle. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us here in Washington, D.C., Malik Abdul is a Republican strategist. From California, we're joined by Spencer Critchley. He is a former Obama campaign advisor. Also in Washington, D.C. is Jackie Luqman. She is the co-host of By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik. Welcome to all of you to the show. Jackie, let me start with you. This was a narrow win for Raphael Warnock in this Senate runoff race in Georgia. Although it was narrow, it does give the Democrats a majority now in the United States Senate. But what does it mean? What can they do now?
Well, I think the Democrats will do more of what they've been doing, which is not a whole lot that will actually change or improve, I should say, to be specific, the material conditions of the people who came out to put Raphael Warnock back in the Senate seat in Washington. I think the narrowness of this victory is an indication of two things regarding these two political parties. Number one, that, betting on Herschel Walker to somehow siphon off some black votes to the Republican Party because, Walker is black and he is also a former Heisman Trophy winner. I think the GOP thought that they would capitalize on his popularity in those areas, and that would be a good substitute for any decent or coherent, quite honest, policy platform that Walker would have been able to convey, which he just did not. But on the other side of the aisle, I think the narrowness of the victory of Warnock also reveals that while people may have understood that they were voting to keep Walker out of the Senate and to keep the GOP from gaining control of the Senate, they're also not all that enthusiastic about Raphael Warnock, because what has he delivered for Georgia in his first term? So I think there are serious lessons to be learned on both sides of the aisle. Certainly, voter suppression that the GOP has engaged in for decades of years if not decades absolutely contributed to the narrowness of this loss. But I think weak policy platforms and a bad candidate on the other end really is a part of the entire story.
Malik Abdul, let's put some context to this runoff election. I mean, it took place at a time when the economy is struggling. We've seen President Biden's approval ratings, it's extremely low. And this was a loss for the GOP in what has been a GOP stronghold in the state of Georgia. There have been questions now being raised about whether Herschel Walker was the ideal candidate for this particular race. Here's Georgia's Lieutenant Governor, Jeff Duncan. He's a Republican. He said he didn't vote in this election, but this is what he had to say about Walker.
He didn't earn my respect or my vote throughout the process. I mean, was it the part that he actually lived in Texas and tried to call Georgia home? Is it the fact that he never articulated a single conservative policy position, not one single one? Was it that he took on the allegations about his personal behavior by calling everybody a liar? Or if you just add them all together, that's why I got to that point.
So Malik, was this a mistake? Was it a mistake to nominate Herschel Walker for this position?
That currently seems like the narrative, but I actually think it's worth pushing back a bit on this idea that Herschel Walker himself was just this terrible candidate who Donald Trump thrust onto the national stage. Keep in mind, in October of 2021, Mitch McConnell and other Republicans were endorsing Herschel Walker before the Georgia primary, which wasn't until May of the very next year. Mitch McConnell and many other Republicans seemed as if they had buyer's remorse when it came to Herschel Walker. But I think that the notion, for one, that somehow the only reason that Herschel Walker was chosen was because he's Black, I think this diminishes him and really the Black community in a very negative way. I think that Herschel Walker was popular in the state, and they expected his celebrity of being an NFL star, being a son of Georgia and a football star in Georgia. I think that that is the thing that made Mitch McConnell and many others get behind Herschel Walker in a similar way that what happened with Burgess Owens in Utah. Burgess Owens is a former NFL player, but he's currently a member of Congress. Herschel Walker indeed was not the most ideal candidate, and he definitely was flawed. But I think it's also worth keeping in mind that Herschel Walker came within 3 points of beating Raphael Warnock. So despite all of his flaws, Herschel Walker actually closed the gap. He actually lost, if you will, by a smaller margin than Stacey Abrams, who ran her second race against Brian Kemp. So yes, there were some problems there, but I don't think that this says anything. A larger issue as far as Donald Trump, then people blaming Donald Trump for this. Herschel Walker won the Republican primary by 68 points. His closest competitor was 13. So if there were other better candidates in Georgia, they were probably about 50 points away.
Malik, talking about Donald Trump, the former president, is this an indication that his once very bright star in the Republican Party is now fading?
I don't think so at all. Georgia is a very particular case because keep in mind, Georgia initially, back in 2020 and 2021, there were many Republicans in Georgia who were absolutely upset with Brian Kemp because they didn't feel as if Brian Kemp did enough. Donald Trump was on the other side of Brian Kemp and attacking Brian Kemp, and Brian Kemp ended up having a not so difficult race against the person that Trump chose, who was Senator Perdue. I think it was Perdue. Was his last name. But I think that there are things that we can learn. Yes, absolutely. As I've said on here before, one of the issues with Donald Trump is that Donald Trump endorsed everyone from at the federal level, and he even endorsed state secretaries of state and governors and things typically that politicians don't do. I don't think this is an indictment necessarily on Donald Trump, because even those people that he supported, like in Adam Laxalt, who lost in Nevada, Adam Laxalt lost by 0.8 percentage points. So it's kind of hard to make the argument that Donald Trump himself was such a drag and that some of these candidates were so terrible when the gaps themselves were so close.
Spencer Critchley, there was a lot of handshakes, backslapping, self-congratulations among Democrats today once this result was confirmed. They now have a clear majority in the United States Senate. What does it mean, really? What can they do with this?
Well, the most important thing I would say is not so much what it means for Democrats, but what it means for democracy. I think the problem, I agree with Malik that the Walker candidacy and, the putting forward someone who I think any objective observer has to conclude is just absolutely unfit for any form of public office is not Donald Trump's fault, and it's not Mitch McConnell's fault. It's indicative of the moral rot of a Republican Party that is currently led by somebody who's trying to overthrow the Constitution and has been trying hard to do that for some time now.
Spencer, Malik did also make the point that this was a very narrow loss. I mean, it's a split almost down the middle.
Loss, and this is an indication of the crisis that democracy is facing right now. I think that Democrats are relieved, and it is a historic success when you consider that the norm is to lose 30 to 60 seats in the Congress in the midterm. But still, I do not think they should be slapping themselves on the backs, and I think many Democrats remain concerned because, as Malik points out, it was close, and I would say disturbingly close. And I align with those Republicans of conscience who want the current Republican Party to lose and to keep losing until it gets back on board with supporting democracy. I don't think anybody should be trying to help this Republican Party win unless they actually want to overthrow democracy, just like I would be working against the Democratic Party if it were similarly corrupt and anti-American.
Well, tell me, Spencer, you've mentioned democracy several times. How would democracy in the United States have been compromised if Herschel Walker had won?
It's part of the continuing rot. I mean, the cynicism that goes into nominating a Herschel Walker. And yes, it is disrespectful of Walker, and I think they were exploiting and manipulating him. It's also disrespectful of black people that the Republican Party in its current form apparently holds the black population in such contempt that they think black Georgians would vote for Herschel Walker, apparently because he's black and he's famous. And he was rejected by overwhelming margins of black Georgians, many of whom report being deeply offended that the Republican Party thought that was an adequate candidate to represent them or anybody. And as I say, this is part of the overall pattern of a current version of the Republican Party. I say the current version of the Republican Party that has no stake in democracy anymore and is working hard across the country to overturn it.
All right, joining us now from Florida is Eric Bolling. He is the host of Eric Bolling, The Balance on Newsmax television. Eric, great to see you. We're talking about the outcome of that runoff election in Florida. First, your thoughts on the result, not just the result of this runoff election, but of the whole midterms as well. I mean, do Republicans now have to go back to the drawing board?
I do think that the Republicans should go back to the drawing board. I'm kind of amused by this conversation of, Republicans or conservatives are anti-democracy because they put up Herschel Walker to run in Georgia for a Senate seat. I mean, come on. Look, I've been on this show saying it was a mistake for Herschel Walker to be the candidate to run against Raphael Warnock. It should have been someone who has got more experience in politics. I mean, this was at one point prior to the original election, it looked like it was going to be a very close Senate race. Who was going to have the balance of power may end up in one or two seats. Herschel Walker was never a good candidate, and I said it on this show. I think the Republicans need to embrace. I'm a libertarian Republican. Okay, I'm a conservative libertarian. I think my side needs to embrace things like abortion and things like, we need to look into climate change, not necessarily mandate climate change, but look into climate change. I think it's tone deaf not to. However, what kind of gets me going here is there are analysts who think it was a bad idea for Herschel Walker to run, the Republicans run Herschel Walker. Meanwhile, John Fetterman at the time could barely put a sentence together, don't know where he is now. What we've got right now, guys, is a situation in America where people aren't voting for the candidate, they're voting for the the button that the candidate is going to press. So no matter who the candidate is on the right, he's going to vote anti-abortion laws.
Yeah.
He's going to vote, or she is going to vote straight down the Republican ticket. And on the left, it's going to be the same exact thing.
Okay.
Why are we so now bifurcated that we can't vote for the people who are the best people for the country and not the people who are going to vote along the party lines? It's terrible what's going on. Herschel Walker never should have run.
Okay, Jackie, you want to say something?
I think it's disingenuous to compare John Fetterman suffering a medical issue and still returning to the campaign trail and actually winning his race quite handily against, a television quack doctor, and comparing him to the politically and platform related incoherence of Herschel Walker. I think that's a disingenuous comparison.
Coherent in the last stages of the election?
I'm sorry?
You're suggesting John Fetterman was coherent? The guy had to, he had to be given a teleprompter, at which point he couldn't even read his own teleprompter and answer questions accurately. I'm for fracking. I'm against fracking. I'm for fracking in one sentence. The guy, he could run later. He should never have been a U.S. senator.
Having a medical condition that makes it difficult for you to enunciate words as you're recovering is a different issue from not being able to convey any of your party's political platform at all, because you're just not tuned in to how to do that in a coherent way, in an intellectual way.
Walker should run. I predicted he wasn't going to win on this show months ago, but nor should John Fetterman have been the U.S. senator from Pennsylvania right now.
You're conflating a medical issue with someone who's an unfit candidate.
Right. I want to move on.
Fitness is relevant, yes.
Eric, Jackie, I need to move on. Malik, I want to get to something else. I'm going to kind of fast forward to the beginning of January, which is when this new Congress will be seated. The Guardian newspaper has reported that some members of the Republican Party are intent on holding up key bills like a bill to raise the debt ceiling, and that could threaten the United States economy. We've, of course, seen this before, lots of posturing, but at the end of the day, most of the people in Congress vote the same way. Is this more bark than bite for the Republicans?
Yeah, sure. And before I answer that, I just want to address one point. There's been a lot of discussions about what the Republican Party is doing and how bad Herschel Walker was in the representation of Black people. I think it's also worth discussing, if we're going to talk about the losses, like a Herschel Walker, to also acknowledge that Congressman-elect John James and Congressman-elect Wesley Hunt out of Texas are two Republicans, Black Republicans, who will now be part of the Black Republican caucus in Congress. But to your question about what happens in January, I do think that there are some things that Republicans are going to be able to do as far as pulling the purse string is concerned. Maybe we'll be able to pull back some of that money for Ukraine. But there's going to be a lot of jockeying. So Kevin McCarthy, assuming he ends up being getting the speakership, he will have to do a lot of jockeying within his party. Obviously, many times we've heard it over and over again. People say that they're not going to support certain things, or they hold out in anticipation of being able to get certain sweetheart deals, what we used to call pork. But yeah, so I expect that type of political jockeying to happen. The race that Andy Biggs is now waging against Kevin McCarthy, it is something that's going to present a problem for him. But Republicans will have, it seems, the exact same number of seats that Democrat had as far as the majority, 222 seats. So there will be some things that Kevin McCarthy has to do, but I think at the end of the day, they'll get on board.
Okay. I want to get back to Kevin McCarthy and Andy Biggs in a moment, but Spencer Critchley, first I want to ask you about the power of the purse that the Republicans now have in the United States House of Representatives. And some of them, as Malik mentioned a moment ago, have also been threatening to stop funding for the conflict in Ukraine. I mean, do you see that happening?
Boy, I sure hope not, but it just seems to be part of this pattern where apparently the only thing that matters is power. And to line up essentially as sisters of Russia, whether that's deliberate or not, seems to me irresponsible in the extreme, and also a profoundly stupid political strategy, if you want to look at it that way. The Kevin McCarthy, apparently by every indication of his past behavior, will just go whichever way the wind is blowing that he thinks might get him into the speaker's chair and keep him there. It's really, truly disturbing. And I want to agree with something Eric said a few minutes ago, that it is part of this crisis that we have reached a state where people will essentially vote for, a banana split if it's got their party's letter next to it, an R or a D. Luckily, that's not true of all Americans. And I think that some of the greatest patriots in our country right now are ordinary people who still insist on trying to determine whether they're voting for somebody who's honest and who's qualified and who has their and the country's best interests at heart. And unfortunately, we're in a state now where many people, especially in the current Republican Party, I don't want to say it's only happening there, but it's a very serious problem there right now, have just concluded that, nothing matters, as some Republican activists will say out loud, nothing matters, LOL, and have just embraced the nihilistic pursuit of power and essentially have no moral code, apparently, other than what can be sold to an electorate that they view as suckers to be manipulated by playing on their, fear and mutual hatred that they try to stoke. But there are Republican patriots and Democratic patriots, as I say, who are just trying to preserve the basic fundamentals of democracy.
Yeah.
And that's who we have to pin our hopes on. I think that's a big part of why Reverend Warnock won an election that was too close, was Republicans and independents who would otherwise have probably voted for a sane and basically qualified Republican who could not bring themselves to do that.
Eric Bolling, I want to look a little bit closer at this leadership battle that's taking place among Republicans in the House of Representatives. You have Kevin McCarthy, and he's got a lot of support, but now that support is being challenged by Andy Biggs, who is a congressman from the state of Arizona. This is what Biggs tweeted. He said, "I'm running for Speaker to break the establishment. Kevin McCarthy was created by, elevated by, and maintained by the establishment." Are we seeing something of a split coming up here?
We've seen the split. You're right. We've seen the split. Donald Trump brought the split. He highlighted he brought a new breed of Republican into D.C. They used coming in during the swamp, removed the establishment Republicans, and he won on the businessman changing the world. And what ended up happening was he created a third party. He created the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, the old establishment wing, Mitch McConnell, even Lindsey Graham, who can't figure out which side he's going to play on. He gets involved in. Kevin McCarthy, absolutely, the Bush dynasty, all of them, Karl Rove, they are the establishment, and they feel right now, you can see it. You can see them bubbling up. They're seeing the energy like, hey, maybe we're going to get our party back, the establishment wing of the Republican Party. And the MAGA wing, it's got its tails between its legs. You guys are right. There are a lot of losses. There were a lot of high-profile losses.
Yeah.
Trump, in my opinion, who's a friend, and we've been doing this for 2 or 3 years, or 4 years, maybe even more, maybe even 5 years. I've been coming on the show. I'm close with him. I think he's made some mistakes recently. I think this whole idea of mentioning the Constitution, I believe wholeheartedly that if Trump really wants to win the presidency, he should have done it before, or at least now. Start looking forward to 2024 and saying, this is how I want to change the country back. This is want to keep the good parts of what we did before and try and fix some of the things that he don't agree with the Biden administration, instead of give it up. You lost in 2020. It's over. Let's focus on 2024 and move forward. We are, and thank you, Spencer, for agreeing with this, we are in a situation where it's, I don't care who, I'm going to vote blue. I don't care, I'm going to vote red until I'm dead. That's got to change. I hate to say this, I'm a libertarian conservative. This is where America is. We're both sides of the center, right? I'm right of center. Abortion, sleep with who you want, get an abortion, do what you want, smoke whatever you want, wear your hair, change your sexual identity. I don't care. Just keep government out of my taxes, out of my backyard. Let them tell me when I have to put a vaccine into my body. That's where America is, but there's no party representing the center anymore.
Okay, I need to move on. Jackie, I want to move on to another big story that made news this week, and that was the release of Twitter documents by its new owner, Elon Musk, that shows that Democrats and even some in the security establishment in the country took steps, looks like they did take steps, to block incriminating information about Hunter Biden, the president's son. Many analysts have called that censorship, and some analysts have even been saying that had this information been allowed to get out at that time, which was in the run-up to the 2020 election, it could have changed the outcome of the election.
Well, I think that's an overstatement. I don't think the information would have changed the outcome of the election, because the information was out and corporate media outlets did talk about the story, even if they were talking about the story in the context of poo-pooing it and saying it's not a story. So it was not that people could not access the information, that it wasn't out there. It was, but corporate media, and not just social media, but corporate media did coalesce to advance the narrative that this story that the Republicans are pushing, because the story was broken in the New York Post, which is a right-leaning media outlet. Yeah, this is not a big deal. This is just some foolishness from the Republicans. Well, I mean, the thing is, what Twitter did in literally censoring the story from being shared on its outlet and suspending people, that was censorship.
Okay.
Would that have changed the election if they had allowed the story to be shared? No.
Yeah, okay.
But I think it does reflect that I think there is something there, but it also reflects how both political parties are very invested in monitoring content on social media. On social media outlets that they don't
I want to get to Spencer very quickly for his take on these Twitter documents. Spencer, I've only got a minute. What do you make of it?
Yeah, well, you know, the Hunter Biden story was obviously the October surprise that time that unfortunately the Republican Party reliably rolls out. And I think they just bungled the handling of it by making it look too much like Russian disinformation. It seemed so similar to all the Russian disinformation they were also pushing that it was easy to dismiss it. And the, the censorship, so-called, was, as is shown by the Twitter documents release, a subject of internal debate and was reversed in 2 days. And it amounted to naked pictures of Hunter Biden was what was at issue. And meanwhile, the Trump administration actually who were in power, were getting Twitter to reverse their content publications as well.
We are going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.